Okay, let's move on to our polishing step here. Let me explain my setup here. This is a 8-inch acrylic disc, 1/4 inch thick, and it is backing for a leather buff that has been attached with a string on the back to pull it tight like a drum head. And then this centered washer here, I coned that so that it actually puts force on the center here so that that cannot stretch out either. You want that leather buff to stay nice and taut and flat against that face. Underneath that is I think it's a 16th inch foam pad. Gives it a little bit of cushion, not without the leather directly against the acrylic, which is a really hard surface. And I've already wet the leather buff, and I have here a wet slurry of cerium oxide. And we will just add some slurry to our leather buff here. And you just want to smear that around, get rid of all the little chunks, kind of smooth those out a little bit. And I wear nitrile gloves for this operation specifically because cerium oxide, if it dries out on your skin, it can cause your skin to dry out quite a bit. So you want to keep that cerium oxide away from your skin. You also want to keep it wet. Anytime you're working with cerium oxide, it's perfectly harmless as long as it's wet, unless it's directly on your skin, and eventually it will dry out, cause cracking like I said. But other than that, when cerium oxide is in the air and you actually breathe it in, it could be an inhalant hazard and can cause respiratory difficulties. So let's pull out one of our stones here. This is an oval, and we got a pretty good polish on it already by going up through the 3000 grit wheel. So this is a final polish. I like to use cerium oxide on wet leather. For my final polish, it really does a nice job. One of the things to be mindful of is that this builds up a lot of heat, and it does it really quick. And while quartz is really good at dispersing heat across the crystal, it can actually become overheated and actually crack towards the edges. So you want to be careful not to overheat this at any point. So with that, let's get started. I've got a spritz bottle here of water. I'll be spraying that quite often, and I've also got a little dish of water here that I use to actually cool the stone off and clean the stone off after I'm finished. So let's get this wheel spinning here. Give it a little kick. We'll spray that again just to keep the cerium oxide dust down. I'll go ahead and pre-wet the stone. And I'm going to start right across the middle. We're going to start with the flat face. And that's already getting warm. It's already dried that cerium oxide out. So let's go ahead and wet things down, give it a chance to cool down, dip it in the water and cool it off. We can move back in. And I'll start moving around towards the edge of the oval a little bit. And same thing, you don't want to go very far before you wet things down and cool things off. And I'm going to turn that so that it's facing down just a little bit. And what I'm trying to do is keep the leather buff from actually grabbing the stone. It can pop loose from the dop wax, go flying, become damaged that way. Or it could damage your leather buff and tear it, cause it to actually tear and start flopping around like a blown tire on a car. Continue to work a little bit of that surface right around each time, just moving a little closer to the edge. Cool that off, spritz that down, and at this point I can actually come in and move towards the outside of the wheel a little bit where I've got some fresh slurry. Work that edge a little bit, and I can see that it's staying nice and wet out here. And we'll move right onto the edge of the stone. Okay, cool that down again. And I like to make 2 passes, so we'll start over again. We'll go with the flat face. And I'm tilting that stone up just a little bit to keep the edge from being grabbed by the leather. wet things down a little bit. Move this down a little. Start working a little closer to the edge again. Okay, that's pretty good. Wet that down, and final pass, we'll come in and actually work that very edge of the crystal cap there. And I'm not worried so much about the stone. It's probably going to be covered in the end by a bezel, so no one will ever see that most likely. Though this could be set in an open setting as well. So I've actually polished the stone itself up through 3000, so it's got a fairly good polish on it. But more than likely this is going to be set into a silver bezel and will be covered all the way up just past the edge of where the stone and the crystal cap start to meet, which is again why we roll our edge all the way down to that junction between the stone and the cap, so the bezel has a place to actually grab the stone and hold it in place. So let's work that slurry off of my hands here and keep it in the water. Clean the stone up a little bit. And this is one place where it's really handy to have a towel. However, I do not keep towels close to my lathe. I always move them off out of the way. Lathes are notorious for grabbing loose clothing, ties, hair. If you've got long hair, keep it back. And towels. Keep these towels away from your spinny bits. If they get dragged into that, they could pull you in and cause you great injury. So don't get in the habit of leaving the towel on your lap or laying it over the top of the lathe or anything like that. Always just throw it off to the side, well away from your lathe. And if you see anybody pick it up and move close to the lathe with it, stop them. I've had that happen before as well, and managed to catch them before anything untoward's happened. So let me check this. We had gotten rid of all of these scratches on the up through the 3000 grit, and I'm pretty happy with the way we've improved the gloss on this particular stone. And I'll show that to you now. And you can see that we actually turned out fairly well. Now this stone is still a little bit thick. I like to leave the stone a little bit thick, and then the very last step is I will break this stone off of the dop it on the top, and then I will remove a little bit of stone on the bottom to actually set my thickness for the overall thickness for the stone. And I like my stones to be about 6 millimeters thick. 5.5 to 6 millimeters is a good stone height, and it's pretty common among cabochons that that's the height you're going for. Now if it's a much bigger stone, then you might leave it a little thicker just for strength purposes. But in this case, I will actually grind a millimeter off of the flat side on the back, set my stone height, and then on the final step, I will actually go in and break this sharp edge that's left here on the bottom, around the bottom. And the reason you want to do that is because when silversmiths actually set their bezels up, they usually solder those to a back plate, and there would be a little bit of fillet along the inside of that bezel. And if you're not careful, this sharp edge, they'll set the stone down in there, and the stone, instead of sitting on the back plate, will actually be sitting up on this sharp edge on that fillet. And that's not an ideal situation. So do your silversmith a favor, break this sharp edge just a little bit, maybe a millimeter deep. It doesn't have to be much, because the fillet is not going to be very large, but that will help ensure that the stone actually sits down flush against the back plate without your silversmith having to remove that fillet, because it's a real pain to remove the fillet. So that's something to keep in mind when you're finishing your stones. And that concludes our polishing.